Assalamualaikum and hello to Miss Era and to all my fellow friends from K9. So today we are from Group 5 presenting our presentation about hypothalamus and pituitary gland. So, first of all, do you still remember what is hypothalamus and pituitary gland? It's okay, I will help you to recap a bit about hypothalamus and pituitary gland. So, hypothalamus is a gland that in our brain that controls our hormone system, while pituitary gland is referred the master gland because it monitors and regulates many bodily functions through the hormones that it produces. So why these two must be paired? This is because the location of hypothalamus and the pituitary gland is connected to one and another. The pituitary gland is at the base of the brain, behind the bridge of the nose, and directly below the hypothalamus. Next, we move on to know more about hypothalamus. The hypothalamus helps regulate the body's internal environment in two ways. First, through the autonomic nervous system, which influences the body temperature, blood pressure, and etc. Second, it also controls the glandular secretion of pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is a small gland about 1 cm diameter connected to the hypothalamus by stalk-like structures. That's all from me.
So now I'd like to talk about the posterior pituitary. Neurons in the hypothalamus, called the neurosecretory cells, produce the hormones antidiuretic, which is also known as ADH, and oxytocin. This hormone pass through the axons in the posterior pituitary, where they are stored in axon terminals. Certain neurons in the hypothalamus are sensitive to the water-salt balance of the blood. When these cells determine that the blood is too concentrated, ADH is released from the posterior pituitary. Upon reaching the kidneys, ADH causes water to be reabsorbed. As the blood becomes dilute, ADH is no longer released. This is an example of control by negative feedback mechanism. The effect of the hormone to dilute the blood shuts down the release of the hormone. Thus, negative feedback mechanism maintains the stable conditions and homeostasis. Now, the hypothalamus produces two hormones, which is also known as ADH and oxytocin. And these hormones stored and secreted by the posterior pituitary. If too little ADH is secreted, or if the kidneys become unresponsive to ADH, a condition known as diabetes insipidus results. Patients with this condition are usually very thirsty. They produce copious amounts of urine and become severely dehydrated if the condition is untreated. The consumption of alcohol inhibits ADH release. This effects helps explain the frequent urination associated with drinking alcohol. Now let's look at the hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone that is released in response to the activation of sensory nerves during labor and breastfeeding. Oxytocin is the other hormone made in the hypothalamus, causing uterine contraction during childbirth and milk letdown when a baby is nursing. The more the uterus contraction during labor, the more nerve impulses reaches the hypothalamus, causing oxytocin to be released. Similarly, the more a baby suckles, the more oxytocin is released. In both instances, the release of oxytocin from the posterior pituitary is controlled by the positive feedback mechanism. That is, the stimulus continues to bring about an effect that ever increases in intensity.
It actually consists of two capillary networks connected by a vein. It also lies between hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. The hypothalamus, controlled by the anterior pituitary, will produce two types of hormone, which is hypothalamic releasing hormone, which will stimulate anterior pituitary to secrete a thyroid stimulating hormone, and the second one is hypothalamic inhibiting hormone, will prevent the anterior pituitary from secreting prolactin. Just like the diagram shown here, the cycle we goes with the first one, neurosecretory cell produce a hypothalamic releasing and the hypothalamic inhibiting hormone. The second step, these hormones are secreted into a portal system, and the third step, each type of hypothalamic hormone either stimulates or inhibit production and secretion of an interior pituitary hormone. And the last step, the anterior pituitary secretes its hormone into the bloodstream, which deliver them to the specific place such as cells, tissue, and glands. Proceed to the next subtopic, which is anterior pituitary hormone affecting other glands. So the first hormone is gonadotropic hormone, which stimulates the gonads, which is testes in male and ovaries in female, to produce gametes and sex hormone. The second one is adrenocorticotropic hormone that stimulates the adrenal cortex to produce cortisol. So what is cortisol? Cortisol is actually an essential hormone that affects almost every organ and tissue in your body. It plays many important roles, including regulating your body's stress response. In the slide before this, I have mentioned that hypothalamic inhibiting hormone will prevent anterior pituitary from secreting prolactin. So what is actually the function of prolactin? Prolactin is actually responsibility in milk production and the development of mammary gland within breast tissue. Last but not least, as shown in the diagram is the example, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, stimulates the thyroid to produce thyroxine, and tridothyronine, which is T4 and T3. In each instance, the blood level of the last hormone in this sequence exerts negative feedback controls over the secretion of the first two hormones. And the last one, other example is growth hormone that stimulates bone and tissue.
Next, we are going to discuss about anterior pituitary hormones that were not affecting other glands. There are three hormones produced by the anterior pituitary that do not affect other glands. First, we have prolactin, which is produced only after childbirth. It causes the mammary gland in breast to develop and produce milk. It also plays a role in carbohydrate and fat metabolism. Next is melanocyte-stimulating hormone. This hormone causes skin color changes in many fishes, amphibians, and reptiles having melanophores, which is skin cells that produce color variation. The concentration of this hormone in humans is very low. Lastly, growth hormone or somatotrophic hormone. It promotes skeletal and muscular growth. It increases the rate at which amino acids enter cells and protein synthesis occurs. It also promotes fat metabolism as opposed to glucose metabolism. The amount of growth hormone produced is greatest during childhood and adolescence. So what happens if we have too little or too much growth hormone? If too little growth hormone is produced during childhood, the individual has pituitary dwarfism, characterized by normal proportion but small stature. Such children also have problems with low blood sugar or hypoglycemia because growth hormone normally help oppose the effect of insulin on glucose uptake. Meanwhile, if too much growth hormone is secreted during childhood, the person may become a giant. Giants usually have poor health primarily because growth hormone cancels out the effect of insulin, promoting diabetes mellitus. On other occasions, as growth hormone overproduced in adults, a condition called acromegaly results. This is because long bone growth is no longer possible in adults. Only the feet, hands, and face can respond, and this portion of body become overly large. Next, how does prolactin differ from other anterior pituitary gland? The hypothalamic regulation of prolactin secretion by the anterior pituitary gland is different from the hypothalamic regulation of other pituitary hormone in two respects. First, hypothalamic control of prolactin secretion is primarily inhibitory, whereas the hypothalamic control of the secretion of other anterior pituitary hormone is stimulatory. Thus, if the anterior pituitary is separated from the influence of the hypothalamus, the secretion of prolactin increases, whereas that of the other anterior pituitary hormone decreases. Next, the hypothalamic factor that inhibits prolactin secretion is the neurotransmitter dopamine, which is not neuropeptide, as are the other hypothalamic hormones that regulate anterior pituitary hormone secretion.
In conclusion, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland exert control over the endocrine system. Neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus produce antidiuretic hormone, also known as ADH, and oxytocin, which are stored in axon endings in the posterior pituitary until they are released. As with most hormones, secretion of ADH is regulated by the negative feedback mechanism. The effect of the hormone shuts down its release. In contrast, during childbirth and milk letdown, oxytocin secretion is regulated by the positive feedback mechanism. A stimulus brings about ever-increasing hormone levels. The hypothalamus produces hypothalamic releasing hormones and hypothalamic inhibiting hormones, which pass to the anterior pituitary by the way of portal system. The anterior pituitary produces several types of hormone. Some of these stimulates other endocrine glands. Gonadotropic hormones influence the gonads. Adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulates the adrenal glands, and thyroid stimulating hormone acts on the thyroid gland. 3 anterior pituitary hormone act directly on tissues. Prolactin causes mammary gland development and milk production. Melanocyte stimulating hormone affects the skin color, and growth hormone causes the skeletal and muscular growth. That's all from Group 5. Thank you for watching and listening to our video presentation on hypothalamus and pituitary gland.